Hello everyone and welcome back to ThursDev. I'm your host Luke, and today I'd like to talk a little bit about one of the most underappreciated disciplines in the game industry, at least by those outside of it: quality assurance. In case anyone's unclear on the definition, in the games industry, a QA tester or analyst is a person whose entire job within the company is to run tests on the game in a play environment in an attempt to find bugs. They redline text, find game exploits, test geometry and visual fidelity, they check that the game mechanics are performing as designed, and attempt wherever possible to find where those mechanics can be leveraged to do something unexpected in the game. Though in a less elegant manner of speaking, they are indeed people paid to play a video game all day. The QA tester is the person with the most exposure on a day-to-day basis in the play experience, and is on the hook for relaying back to the production, design, and programming teams, generally speaking through the producers, when something's wrong with the game. It's on the rest of the team to take this information, written as discrete bug reports, and address it. They're a valuable but sadly undervalued part of a game studio, especially in today's market of increasingly complex and large-scoped games. If the producer is the most picked-on role in the games industry from the inside, QA is without a doubt in my mind the one that gets the most flack from the outside. There's hardly a single new major game release that happens in the modern day that isn't picked apart within the first few days for all of its little flaws and imperfections. And for better or worse, buggy, broken, and exploitable are common words in the gamer lexicon in present day. And frequently, it seems that the blame is squarely placed on the shoulders of QA. The bigger the game is, it seems, the buggier they get, and very often you're likely to hear facetious statements like, "How did this game make it through QA? What were the QA team even doing?" Or, "Did they even do QA on this game?" It's become such a visible issue that encountering a game that doesn't have any bugs is, at this point, considered a rarity. So why does this happen? Is it incompetence or laziness on the part of QA teams? Is it that teams are not being assigned to a project soon enough, or perhaps that the QA periods are just too short? Is it that with QA being the de facto bottom rung of the game development ladder, that people with the skill to do anything but QA are already doing something else? Today I'd like to explore the situations in which games get shipped with bugs, including the what, why, and perhaps the who of it all, if you'll indulge me. I started my career in games in QA, and have been on either side of the testing trenches, within the testing team itself, or on the production side managing testing over a good portion of my career. I've been directly, intimately involved in the QA process of at least 15 titles within my time at Konami, Acquire, Premium Agency, Frontier, and now AlphaDog Games. In that time, I've experienced a little cross-section of every possible kind of bug you can find within a game. Graphical glitches, crashes, physics errors, collision problems, sound issues, exploits, data corruption, all things that are surprisingly commonplace in video game development prior to release. I've worked in QA teams sized anywhere between 2, and if you count short-term members and outsourcing, as many as 30 or 40, and in no instance have I ever encountered a game that you could describe as having been consistently bug-free from the start. I've never worked on a AAA game. Comparatively, the games that I worked on were reasonably small in scope, but on any given project I would find, research, and write anywhere in the range of 10 to 50 bugs on any given day of varying levels of severity, and I'm by no means some sort of QA wonderkind. Between all the members of a team, you'll rarely see a game whose total bug count by the time Gold Master is released that's below 5 digits with the contributions of all of its testers. I would venture to say that the numbers get far more impressive as the scope and time span of a project grows. Regardless of project scope though, over the course of development, bugs are just an inevitability. It's sort of a fact of life of software development. Building mechanics is maybe 70% of the work optimistically. The rest is finding and squishing glitches and the implementation thereof. This means that with the sheer volume of bugs you encounter during the course of development, you're bound to find a few that are either extremely rare from a development perspective, or some that are just not going to be found at all. So how are big, glaring bugs missed? I'm not going to excuse every bug. There are some extreme examples out there that are certainly inexcusable, like the fiasco of a release that was Batman Arkham Knight, for example, where its complete lack of compatibility with a large number of hardware profiles on PC caused the game's frame rates to drop to a measure of seconds per frame, as opposed to frames per second. But there are many cases where a vast number of players will be affected by something that just couldn't be accounted for by a testing team for various reasons. In the case of hardware incompatibilities, like Dishonored 2's issue of being unplayable on a Phenom processor, there are very real issues of development hardware not identifying an issue prior to a product's release, or just too far into development time to be resolvable. Certain software running in parallel, crashing games can easily be missed if the software isn't running on a system that's used to test the game, regardless of its commonality. Hardware and parallel software are, however, PC-specific issues, as your average console has a very specific hardware and software configuration. So what's the deal with games that are released on consoles having issues? I'd like to divide bugs into a few categories for the sake of explaining at this point, as there are varying lead causes for bugs. Hidden in plain sight bugs, just plain hidden bugs, we didn't expect you to do that bugs, elusive bugs, and the impractical to fix bugs. Bugs that are hidden in plain sight are perhaps one of the most annoying to developers in reflection, as they can occur when an issue is introduced late in the game's development cycle, but are largely unnoticed because even during smoke testing, the QA team will test right past it because their method's so well trained to them. This can frequently be caught if the game's scope is acceptably small by doing tests with fresh eyes, bringing in new people to play through the game, but even then there's always going to be a chance that it'll be missed. Some quality of life issues also fall into this category, as the development team and even QA will frequently overexpose themselves to a project and gain a sort of tunnel vision that causes them to become desensitized to things that a player may consider a glaring design flaw. In some cases, though the player casually experiencing a game on their own time might eventually run across them, there are also a proliferation of bugs in many larger games that are a little annoying perhaps, but can easily be overlooked or missed. Bethesda has received more than a little flack from players for floating rocks and trees in their open world games. A tree on a slope whose roots stick straight out one side and the mesh is non-existent on the bottom, for example, but these pieces of foliage and rocks aren't individually hand-placed usually. More likely, the level design of a 10 square mile map in Skyrim includes a fair amount of use of foliage and prop painting, which sometimes just gets it wrong because it's all a randomized algorithm. It's impractical to expect that someone will find and fix every single tree, rock, fork, plate, cheese wheel, and flower bush in the game. Yes, you noticed it and that's grand, but you can also safely bet that a lot of the objects in the game have been fixed by hand to a certain extent, but it's just impractical for one person to go in and do that to every single item in a game, unless you're a modder perhaps. But there's only so much that can be found by a team of even 50 or 100 testers. We didn't expect you to do that bugs are, in many cases, also caused by the development tunnel vision that we all get while creating games, but ultimately the cause of these bugs comes down to a phrase that I like to repeat in design meetings: you can never assume what a player will or won't do. For a great example of this, I ask you to look no further than the much publicized pacifist run of Fallout 4 by The Weirdest, wherein the game loses its shit when a player attempts to end a scripted battle without actually personally killing anyone, nearly making the game unwinnable. The game creates a premise that asks the player to shoot back, and when they refuse to, things go off the rails. Not every example is so extreme, however. Entering some doors before they're meant to be entered, or using an ability that the game doesn't account for in a specific part of a game. Basically any behavior that the developer doesn't think that a player will reasonably do, or will be able to do, can cause the game to behave incorrectly. In extreme cases, even completely break. If the development team are lucky enough to have their QA tester with the right level of persistence and perhaps the right color of insanity, things like this can often be found and squashed ahead of time, but ultimately, some things will be missed, and even if they aren't particularly hard to find, it's not at all unreasonable to say that there's a good chance that a large subsection of users may just decide, I want to try to play this way, when there was nothing designed for that play style. Those, of course, are the bugs that a developer misses. There are also some bugs whose inclusion in a game just become a matter of it being too impractical for the bug to be removed. On occasion, these bugs will be a bug that the QA or some other member of the development team encounters once, but there is far too little data to really track the issue down. A mysterious crash or an outlandish behavior by an NPC that, no matter what's done, just can't be reproduced. And without repro steps, a bug often can't be fixed. Knowing that if one of 50 people developing the game experienced, that could be as much as 10 in 500, 100 in 5,000, or maybe even more, nobody wants to ship these bugs, but you can't fix what you can't find. These bugs tend to become a QA tester's white whale, which they'll spend downtime hunting for. I've had one or two myself. Not every bug is hard to reproduce either, though. We hate those bugs as much as our consumers do, but now and then there'll be something that exists in a game that can in some cases easily be accomplished if you know what to do, but would require way too much additional work to remove from the game. An AI bug that causes your employees in tycoon-style games to wander off into the ocean, never to be seen again, could be fixed, yes, but it would require completely rewriting the behavior of your new DLC boats, and quite possibly retooling the existing AI in the game, for example. Yes, it's annoying, and yes, it has the potential to lessen the gameplay experience in the edge cases where a player does experience it. But yes, it's also an odd enough case that it's unlikely that the average player will come across it over the course of their normal playthrough of the game. At some point, bugs that are anything less than an A priority have to become a serious value judgment on the side of the developers, whether it's worth sinking the resources required to research and remove the bug, or if it can be acceptably left in. Those bugs are perhaps the worst. More often than not, if it's on the cusp of glaring, you'll even have members of the QA and design team championing its removal, or at least obfuscation, but at the end of the day, development time is limited, and it isn't unreasonable to be met with the response, "We'd rather make sure that our core gameplay is solid before fixing minor polishing issues." Some games are more buggy than others. That's understood, and it's unfortunate every time, but even the most experienced and on-the-ball QA team is still going to max out at a few hundred people on the extreme highest end. Compare that to the literally millions of players that bought and played Fallout 4, for example. There will be bugs that a team of any size can't catch. This is one of the reasons that soft launches and early access are becoming so popular. It gives the developer an opportunity to gain an amazing amount of telemetry on their game's functions, as well as feedback and more traditional bug reporting. Some players will scoff and call it free QA or even pay to test, and I honestly can't refute that, but it's a great symbiotic relationship that shouldn't be considered problematic as long as everyone involved understands what's being done and why. As games continue to get bigger and technology continues to become more complex and sophisticated, potential for points of failure grow with it. When 2D became 3D, clipping, physics problems, and rendering errors were a dime a dozen, and though there haven't been any major fundamental shifts in the creation of games in the last 15 years or so, technology does continue to improve, games get more complicated and bigger, and with them come bugs. Even when games were much simpler, some misinformed people like to say that games were less buggy, but many 2D platformers had major collision issues, and quite frequently RPGs were just plain broken, like Final Fantasy I having spells that did absolutely nothing, and a running away system that wasn't based at all on the stats that it was supposed to be, to name only a tiny sliver of all the problems it had. The main reason we have a perception of games being more buggy today is that now that developers have the opportunity to fix bugs post-launch, thanks to the internet and patching, it's more noticeable when a bug is fixed. If games could easily have been patched on consoles in the 80s and 90s, they would have been. I'm not saying that we should be accepting of buggy and broken games. If the games fail too easily or too quickly, the developer should be made to fix them, but we should also recognize the fact that the likelihood of a game being buggy at release is a sad reality, and though there are chances that a QA or a programming or production or art team did drop the ball, it's also possible that the bug just isn't as obvious as it seems to a small team, or that there are just certain circumstances meaning that it couldn't be addressed. And that's all for me today. I'd like to thank you as always for dropping by and hope that you enjoyed this week's episode. If you have an example of a bug-free modern game or one that you believe to be rock solid, I'd love to see it down in the comments section below. I always hope for the opportunity to talk with anyone who cares to pipe up. Regardless though, I appreciate your coming by and I do hope to see you again here soon. Take care.
So they actually did have testers in this game. After playing through it, it really didn't seem like there were any testers.